Hey, thanks for joining us today. We are excited for the opportunity to share with you on the topic of marriage and intimacy within marriage, as well as some of the intruders that couples often face in marriage. I'm Amy Oliver, and this is my husband, Nathan. We have a private practice here in Palm Beach Gardens, and so over the years, we've had the opportunity of working with many couples on this topic. And as February approaches, people oftentimes start thinking about love and romance and how to cultivate that within marriage. And the cultivation of romance and intimacy within marriage is huge. It's really, really important. But it's also critical that you are aware of the things that could rob you of that intimacy and that connection. And so today, a lot of our focus is going to be on what some of those intruders are and how to safeguard and take action steps against them.
So marriage is one of the most vulnerable relationships you'll ever experience in life, and where you hold your heart out to each other, you can experience some of the highest highs, but also some of the lowest lows. And it takes a lot of effort to continually pour in. When you first meet each other, you're kind of on a high of infatuation, and that's what causes you to fall in love, and you commit to marriage. But as life comes along, financial struggles, children, losses in life, it can be very easy to put marriage on the back burner and allow these other things to consume you, to where your partner begins to feel more like a friend or a roommate. You forget to pour in that effort as these different intruders, some of which you are in control of, many of which you aren't, begin to come in. And as they do, that vulnerable relationship can begin to create some disconnect and distance and pain, and that's where some of those low lows can come from.
Right, and when couples experience the greatest level of intimacy and connection, when we would call it a vitalized marriage, that is when the marriage is a priority, like Nathan was talking about. You want to prioritize your marriage. You want your marriage to be number one. And so I would challenge you as we start this conversation to look at, are there different things that have replaced my spouse as number one? Because that would be a great starting point as you consider this conversation. How can we prioritize one another? How can we increase the pursuit so that we give more opportunity for the connection, for the intimacy, to combat and fight against some of these natural intruders that couples oftentimes face?
So any time is a good time to pour into your marriage. We have some couples that come to us that are in a good place and they just want to stay there. Most come to us, they're in a very desperate place and feeling like all hope is lost. And often we find there are many, many things that they have not tried or realized that when they do, if they both can get on board for that, and often it's just one to start that gets on board, but when they both are able to do that, get to experience what marriage really can be. And it does take hard work, and it's okay if you feel like it's hard work or it's too hard, too difficult. And we're going to talk about one area in particular that almost all marriages experience trouble in, almost all marriages have a breakdown in, and one of the primary intruders in that area here in just a little bit. But some of the others that often come in for couples that can consume them and put their marriage on the back burner, one of the most obvious one is children, obviously. They are a gift, they're a blessing, but they are also an intruder. Sometimes literally in your bed or your bedroom. We hear that all the time. Ours have tried that as well. But they consume your time, and rightfully so in some ways. You want to pour into your kids, you want to love them, you want to provide for them, you need to teach them. It takes a ton of energy, a ton of effort, and it's one of those things you'll constantly feel like a failure at, which is very normal. But what we often see is couples will put their kids first. Your marriage needs to be your number one priority. When your marriage comes first and your kids see that, your children will thrive. So children are a big intruder.
Right, and like Nathan was saying, kids oftentimes take over as number one, but the very best thing that you could ever give your children, the best thing that you could provide for them, is a strong, vitalized marriage. So it is really important that you have those date nights, that you guys have that time alone, that you say no to the kids so that you can say yes to one another, and that they know that that relationship takes precedent, that that relationship is really critical and important. It creates a sense of safety and security for them, a level of trust, but again, it leaves them a really strong legacy that they can carry forward in their own life and their own relationships that they pursue. Another intruder can oftentimes be work. We would oftentimes rationalize this, saying, we have to provide for the family, we need income to do our life and to live, which is true. But work can become a priority and consume where there are no boundaries. You're taking work calls and checking emails and text messages at all hours of the night. Even travel and business things can intrude on the marriage and the family when it comes to work.
Yeah, men often feel like that's how they show their love, by providing. And there's some truth in that. It's good to be a provider, and men tend to put their identity more than that in women. We've worked with many couples where a wife is the primary breadwinner, and so that's not just men that might think that way or struggle with that. And while work is important, it doesn't have to be an intruder. It's required. You have to spend a lot of time parenting. You have to spend a lot of time doing work, and you can still prioritize your marriage in the midst of that. Another big intruder can also be family. There's a saying, the top 3 things that cause conflict in marriage are sex, money, and in-laws. And it's not the case for everyone, but often family can be an intruder and consume time, as well as friendships. A lot of time pouring into going out with other couples will say, have you guys done a date night? And yeah, we did a date night. There was another couple along, that doesn't count as a date night.
Right.
And especially when a wife is hanging out with just her friends, or a husband's hanging out with just his friends, that can cause a lot of division. Men tend to consume time through hobbies such as golf or fishing, which is fine in small doses, but can again take up all weekend, and the marriage suffers, family suffers, and so those are some other intruders to watch out for.
So we would encourage you to look at what of these intruders are you currently facing, if any, and are there ways that you could manage them differently, maybe give less time or priority to them so that you can prioritize your spouse and spend more time together. You don't want leisure activities or family or children or work to come in the substitute and in the place of time spent with your spouse. The last one that we want to spend most of our time focusing on today is the intruder in the area of sexuality. Obviously, one of the most intimate experiences that you can share as a couple is sex. And it is really important, and it is a critical area to pursue and to cultivate, but it's a very critical area to protect, because there are many, many intruders and senses of false intimacy in our world today that can really erode the satisfaction and the pleasure that sex is intended to be.
So this is an area that is very often broken down in marriage, and it easily can get put to the side. A lot of hurt can happen here very quickly. Most couples, either that we meet with or that would have an honest conversation about this, if they've been married for a little while, if they have kids, this area is an area where there's hurt, where there's disconnect. Often frequency is down to a couple times a month maybe, versus 2 to 4 times a week, which would be a really healthy, vitalized place. And there's so many different intruders that can come in here. Tiredness, not being connected and pouring into your marriage in other ways. And so this area, there's not the desire there.
Lack of pursuit is another one. Lack
of pursuit. The one we want to talk about today is the distraction, the intruder of pornography. And we'll kind of talk about lust in there as well. But something that has become very pervasive in our culture and community, and in some ways, especially in the world, is accepted more and more, that especially for men, that it's become normalized. However, it has an absolutely devastating effect on the mind, the heart, the marriage, and so we want to talk a little bit about that today and how to approach that in marriage.
So pornography can create a false sense of affection and intimacy. It's really becomes this unrealistic fantasy of what sexuality, especially within marriage, is supposed to be. And it creates this idea of fantasy and unrealistic expectations that your spouse can never meet up with. And it's not just men that look at pornography today, women do as well. And so we understand that some of you might find yourself in this position. And it really is something that we strongly encourage couples and individuals to move away from, because it cannot allow for the true intimacy within marriage to take place when it is present.
So one of the things we want to do is try to help it not be so normalized, to look at it for what it really is and what it really causes. Now, in a sexual relationship within a marriage, it is often that there is one spouse that seems to be less interested or less pursuing than the other, and oftentimes that may be a wife, but that very often we find that not to be the case, where a husband has checked out, is not pursuing his wife, which as a woman is actually all the more hurtful and devastating, because there is this expectation that a husband is going to have a greater desire. He has testosterone, and sometimes that is because he has a lower testosterone, or he's depressed, or there's a disconnect emotionally. Sometimes it's because of pornography or some kind of lust issue going on there. There's not always an easy answer to that, but that can factor in. But as men, especially as you grow up, you go through adolescence, coming into adolescence, there's so many avenues of exposure. And just to define pornography, it can be anything from what they call soft porn to which is like lingerie and not full nudity, to nude pictures, to videos. I mean, everything, thanks unfortunately to the internet, is accessible of all ranges of graphic pornography, and children can be exposed to this all the way up through, thanks to phones, easily hidden. Social media, Instagram, the difficult thing, it is so pervasive. There's been such a proliferation of access to it that it's made it all the more normalized, because it's so accessible and it's so easily hidden and so easily excused that men will just do that. It's one of the most devastating things that I often hear is, well, as long as he's faithful here, it's okay if he looks at pornography or struggles with masturbation and lust, or even, you've even heard, like, goes to strip clubs, as long as it's, not this. And all of these things have nearly an equally devastating effect as a sexual affair to the mind and to the heart.
Right, and we would classify it as unfaithfulness, because it's not the two of you safeguarding and sharing that just between the two of you. And that's really what sexuality and intimacy between a couple is supposed to be. It's supposed to be just between the two of you, not involving anybody else. So even if it's just images, it's still sharing that part of you, that affection, that attention with someone else, an outsider of the relationship. And that does not produce within you or within your marriage with your spouse the opportunity for you guys to have the full pleasure and enjoyment that sex is meant to be. It is addictive in nature. It is also progressive in nature. So what we've oftentimes found is it starts out with a little bit of dabbling here and there. Maybe it's soft porn, maybe it's just a lingering look, maybe it's just gazing a little longer than normal, and then it becomes more and it becomes more and it becomes more, because that is the design of it. Honestly, pornography is designed to be attractive and addictive in nature. The design and the purpose is to grab your attention and to create a feeling and a reaction within you that is exciting and thrilling and makes you want more.
And it is often more of a male issue, in part because of testosterone. Nearly 100% of men have viewed some kind of porn at some time in their life, and usually starting very young. And what happens is because of what goes on in the brain, it releases dopamine, serotonin, same things that drugs, alcohol can release as well. There's emotion that's attached to it. And it's an escape. It's an escape when there's boredom. It's an escape when there's the pleasure-seeking parts of the mind are activated, which again, males tend to get more obsessive about things, tend to take higher risks, tend to sexualize things more, and can just easily excuse that as a safe kind of outlet. And especially try to excuse that if sex is lacking in a marriage. Well, I'm not having this here, so at least I'm not going there, I'll go here. And the irony of that is that rather than pouring into a wife or pouring into a marriage sexually, those supposed releases or outlets actually only inflame that desire more. It increases the desire for those negative things, lustful fantasy, false realities like pornography is, rather than pouring into your wife, pouring into your marriage. And that's one of the things that we often hear from a wife, is that almost feeling like this guilt, well, maybe I wasn't there or available enough sexually. And sometimes that is the case. Sometimes we'll need to challenge a wife and say, hey, listen, you really do need to prioritize this more. It's normal for there not to be that as strong a desire. But But most of the time, that's not the reason husbands are looking at pornography, because a wife is not available sexually. It's not a direct correlation. You know, a man can have a thriving sexual relationship with his wife and still be looking at pornography, because they're two different things. There is some correlation, but there's also a lot of disconnect there. And so it really has to be addressed separately and for what it is, and understood and talked about and held accountable, because it's often very easily hidden. There's a lot of shame and guilt that come around it, or a lot of excusing, a lot of allowances. In fact, some couples even allow it into their marriage, into their sexual relationship, and try to eroticize it. And we often compare that to inviting someone else into your bedroom. You know, you're not literally doing that, but figuratively you are, and functionally you are, and that's absolutely devastating for that romantic connection and that emotional connection.
So Nathan, let's say that maybe some of the people that are watching this video have this present intruder in their marriage. How would you start the conversation to bring it up and then to ultimately eradicate it from being an intruder within the marriage?
Well, I think it's important first to understand more what it's actually doing. An analogy that I use that's somewhat graphic, but I think really captures the emotional and spiritual impact of pornography in a marriage and in a home. And often I'll say this to men. I'll say, if you get a knock at the door, our front door's over there, I'm looking at it. If you get a knock at your front door as a man, you know, you're charged with, in many ways, to be the guardian of your home and your family. And men often take that pretty seriously. If you get a knock at the front door and you open the front door and there's a whole long line of thieves and rapists at the door, you know that they are, and they want to come in. When you as a man, and as a woman too, but again, it tends to be more of a male issue, you as a man view pornography, you invite that into your mind and your heart, in your home, on your phone, or whatever device you're using, it is the equivalent emotionally, spiritually, mentally, relationally, of allowing all those thieves and rapists right into your home, right into your bedroom. It is that violating mentally and emotionally. And so first, couples and individuals need to understand that that is the gravity of what happens here. The world has tried to normalize it so much. Boys will be boys. It's what men do. It's harmless. It is devastating. It is equivalent to that. So taking it with that level of seriousness, you have to be willing to have those awkward conversations. Now, if you're in a marriage where it's out there and it's open and it's known, then you need to go address that and say, hey, listen, I feel like this is devastating for our marriage, and I want to, or we need to do something about it. And there are many marriages where it's out there and it's known, which is good, as long as it's not been normalized, as long as you've not invited it into the bedroom. If that's the case, you want to have a very serious conversation right away and say, hey, listen, I've come to see that this is similar to, if not same to, invite another person literally into our bedroom, which is probably the most devastating thing you could ever do sexually in your relationship. And I want it completely out. I want to be free of this. The more difficult conversation sometimes is when it's never been talked about, which is very often the case. And if that is the case, then you want to be very intentional sometime prior to the next week in the evening. Just say, hey, you know, I watched this talk. We had this conversation in this group, and just want to have a conversation about this. And I want to ask, has this ever been a struggle recently for you? Is this something that we need to put some accountability or some safeguards around? It's especially easy if you have children to say, hey, listen, we have children, we have a family. I think that we've not necessarily given this the weight or gravity that we need. A lot of men are not going to be honest to that question. Again, there's a lot of shame, a lot of fear, a lot of guilt around that. There's some ways, though, that we'll cover at the end to hold that accountable, even if a man does not necessarily want to share that. Most men have to be caught in the act of that before they will confess that. That's pretty normal. But you can at least try to start the conversation by saying, hey, is this in our home? Because this is what it can do. And even talk about your sexual relationship. Say, listen, I feel like we're not connected here, and I know, hey, here's my part in that, and I'll own that. But is this going on at all? Because very often we see a sexual relationship broken down, and a wife will feel a lot of guilt on that. There's something wrong with me. What comes out later is there was pornography usage. And what we have found is the female mind and body, even though it doesn't know for a fact that that's going on, intuitively it does, and it shuts down sexually. So even if you feel shut down, that may be something on you and you need to work on that, but it also sometimes is because there's something else going on over here that again, that spiritual, mental, emotional effect of it will literally subconsciously shut you down as kind of this self-protective thing. So when you kind of start those conversations, which most people don't want to, it can sometimes bring that stuff out. And the point of that is healing. The point of that is to connect and free yourselves, if it's in your home at all, of the impact of that.
A false belief that most people have is that pornography is encapsulated. It's just when I'm looking at it, it's just when I'm actively pursuing it, and it doesn't infiltrate every other area of your life. But as Nathan has explained, that's completely untrue. It does permeate every single area of your life. And it's not just your marriage that it's going to affect. At long term, it is going to impact your children. And very much the habits that you tolerate are the habits that they would then embrace and accept. And you don't want that for them. You don't want to set them up for that. And so that's why this conversation is so critical to have. It is critical to discover if there is this area of your life going on, if this pursuit of pornography is happening within your marriage, either as a single, the one spouse or both spouse together pursuing it. It's really important that it's talked about, that it's understood for the degree that it is, like the frequency and what type, and then also making some plans to get it out, remove it completely.
Some very heavy conversations can come from this. There's sometimes couples where they have some of these conversations and it comes out that one of them was abused growing up and it became kind of an outlet. There's a lot of vulnerable things that you have to be very careful with, but it's still important to have that conversation and to have continued conversations about that so that you guys can begin that potential healing process that is needed. Just like any other drug, pornography is pervasive. It increases in its severity. All right, so while it may start with a picture here or a thought there, especially again, the male brain is easily addicted. It's highly compulsive. It can be. Not all males, but a good portion. And so it can go from something that is easily excused and rationalized to videos, to more graphic things, to even chats, it's never enough. And the real devastating part of it is that desire that inflames cannot be satisfied by a spouse because it is separate, it is different, it is not real. And it is what I often say is the grass is greener on the other side, and that's because it's astroturf. It's not. It looks green, but it's plastic. It's not real. And how can anything compete with that? And it's not until you go and try to fully embrace it that you realize, wait, this is empty. This is not real. And so you want more, and you want more, and you want more. And spouses will come in and just be so devastated by what they have found and how disturbing it is. And the reality is that's not where it started. All right? And it can turn to all kinds of graphic things, which we won't explain here right now, but that's not where it started. It started in what was innocent and excused, and it always has a pervasive nature, and it will always negatively impact the sexual relationship, which can be amazing and can be fully satisfying. And we often say to couples, don't have any sexual experience outside the presence of each other, because why would you? Anything less than that is cheap, and it is not real, but it can be extremely addicting.
It can. So let's suppose you've had this conversation, pornography has been exposed, you understand that that's been an element or a factor, an intruder within your marriage. Maybe we should shift gears and talk a little bit about action steps that a couple can take to get rid of it and safeguard their marriage, protect the intimacy within their marriage. So the first step is obviously having the conversation, admitting it, owning it. From there, you want to look at some accountability. Depending on the degree and the severity of the pornography usage, I would really suggest that you do not try to have accountability just between the two of you, that you look to somebody else. Maybe this is a trusted, safe friend, maybe it's a pastor, and a licensed counselor is also, not just because we're licensed counselors, but that's a great idea, especially if it has been an ongoing, long-standing, pretty involved participation with pornography.
So ultimately, for accountability to work, there has to be an internal conviction, a realization that that this is toxic, this is dangerous, and what we could have together, separate from all of these lustful or distracting things, is so much better. And to long for that, and to talk about that, and to desire that. And then from there, there's this desire to protect that. If it's just accountability for the sake of accountability, there's not a true passion or desire, people always try to find ways around that and excuses for that. And well, you know, every once in a while, it doesn't work. There has to be a full and complete elimination, which, yes, can take some time. But it has to be the goal, it has to be the intention, it has to be the purpose. Otherwise, any forms of accountability, that's the trouble with how much technology we have today, is there's always a way around it. No matter how much you might try to insulate, if someone wants to view something, and that's even the thing with lust, you don't even have to see something, you can just think something where you're not guarding your eyes, not guarding your heart, and focusing them where they need to be. And all these things in the end are empty. Anything outside of marriage, however, in the moment, whatever high it may create, is completely empty. There's only this satisfaction here. So that's what has to be talked about. That's what has to be understood, so that there can be this internal conviction ultimately. Now, with that said, there are a lot of great options to help in that process, to create some accountability. One of our favorites is an app called Accountable to You. This has been out for several years now. The one before this that we used to use was Covenant Eyes, which is good. We feel like Accountable to You is far better. And again, any suggestion we make, there's ways around it. But this is probably the best one. And we have it on every device that we have, our phones. We have a 12-year-old daughter who has a phone, and it's on hers. You know, really, you don't only just think about your marriage, you got to protect your children from this. We've had so many stories where a parent will walk in, their 10-year-old, their 8-year-old, young kids, are on an iPod or an iPhone, something they didn't even realize had internet, and they're viewing this. And it is a devastating thing to have happen. And so you're not just protecting your marriage, you're protecting your entire home, your entire family. So something like Accountable to You, there's really no reason to not have that. If someone is resistant to that, that's a big problem. Because yeah, there's some inconveniences, you know, like on my phone, I in order for Accountable to You to work, she has to put a code in to download apps, but you know what? It's well worth it. What you save yourself from, what you protect yourself from. So just one very simple recommendation is to put that on everything. If it's not on everything, then it doesn't matter. If there's one thing that it's not on,
and it's even on our TV, because I'm sure most of you have a smart TV. So it's on our TV, our computer, the iPad. And
it's not hard to do, and it's something like, I think, $7 a month. It's a great program. So that's one great option for some accountability of protection. And it doesn't block anything. It's just if there is something that was potentially inappropriate viewed, or definitely inappropriate viewed, it sends a text to or an email to whoever you list as your accountability. So we have that on ours for each other, and that all goes to Amy, but you can also have for us, but you can also have, it's great to have if there's a friend. This is a little harder. Sometimes it's really hard to talk about this with someone, but if there is a friend or a sibling or something like that, that can work too.
And I would even say and suggest that, you know, if it is an active problem within your marriage, having some outside external support, it really becomes helpful, because the spouse that has not chosen to view pornography does not want to become the parent. You don't want to be the one that's holding your spouse accountable to that. It creates a negative dynamic between the two of you, and that can even be a hindrance and sometimes about creating intimacy and connection and restoring this area. So if you can have an external accountability partner where the emails or the text messages go to from Accountable to You, that would be preferred. I understand that sometimes that can't necessarily happen. But if it's possible, we would encourage you to do that. Another opportunity for an action step, depending again on the severity and the frequency of use, would be a support group. There are a lot of support groups out there, excellent ones, that provide men and women a safe place to be real, to be vulnerable, without judgment, without shame. And it's full of great ideas, but just the encouragement that you're not alone, and there can be life without the use of porn.
So a great group for men, it's called the Conquer series. Conquer series is excellent. Books like Every Man's Battle, it talks about the battle of lust, how the male brain struggles with that in unique and different ways. And again, I've said this many times, worked with many women that are addicted to pornography, that struggle with it, but it's 10 to 1 at least with men. And so those are some great options. Another really important thing, and this is just in transparency in general with your marriage, but there should be no hidden passwords or phones. Amy can pick up my phone at any point and see whatever's going on, and vice versa. Anything. If there's anything hidden, usually when there's things hidden, when something's in the dark, bad things can happen. It creates a back door, and back doors are not good. Right? So you want to have that transparency on phones. This is with your kids. This is with your spouse. Another thing that we do that I find very convenient just in general, but I think is really important for accountability, is we share location, and that should just be a standard thing for marriage. If I'm running late or she's running late, I can just check location, so it's convenient like that. But again, the pervasiveness of pornography, it can lead to things beyond pornography, things that we call like hands-on, whether that be strip clubs or whether it be massage parlors. There are a lot of things that no one wants to talk about and no one wants to own, but that happen. And so when there's that kind of accountability, it creates some protection. And again, going back to what I said earlier, if their heart's not where it needs to be, then there's always ways around this. But it's helpful to do what you can to guard and protect your relationship and your marriage. One of the final ways of accountability is actually going back to your sexual relationship, is to be having ongoing conversations about connecting sexually, but not just intercourse, but romance, date nights, emotional connection. If those conversations aren't happening, if that area is not being poured into, all these other things are going to be very difficult. They have to be happening together.
They do. Date nights are critical for your marriage, for the interest and the pursuit. We call it curiosity. There is an infinite number of things for me to know about Nathan, and we've been married over 15 years. There's still lots more for me to know and to learn, and I have to have the curiosity for that. There also has to be that set aside time and priority in order for that to take place, and date nights are one of the best ways to do it. As Nathan mentioned before, that it doesn't count when you're with other couples, because it's not just the two of you. You're not having conversations. You're not investing in one another. It's easy to separate, and the dudes talk and the gals connect and all that. So that's not what counts as that date night time together. Many times couples find it awkward or uncomfortable to talk about sex in particular, but it's really important that you're able to talk about the need, the interest, the desire, the likes, the dislikes, all of those things. It helps to create more satisfaction and more connection with one another.
So if you're feeling, which would be normal to feel this, if you're feeling overwhelmed or scared or discouraged just in your relationship in general or with this topic, the place that we encourage you to start is with your faith. God created sex, He created marriage, He created sex to be in the context only of marriage with your spouse. He created it to be pleasurable and enjoyable and romantic and erotic and all of those things. Those things can be good in the right place, in the right context, in the right setting. Anywhere outside of that is empty, and it's addictive, and it is toxic. And so we would encourage you, even before going to your spouse, go to God. Even if you don't know God, you don't necessarily have a strong faith, or even if you do, a lot of people don't pray about this. A lot of people don't talk to God about this. We've heard some really crazy stories. I mean, amazing, amazing stories you can only explain through God about people that have gone and prayed and how God has revealed things in this area. And that can be painful sometimes. You pray these prayers, sometimes there can be painful responses, things you see about yourself or about your spouse. Stories of stuff just falling off shelves right in front of them and they go, whoa, or a phone call that wasn't supposed to come through, or a text that they didn't see, or something found in the car, like all these different stories where God is saying, hey, you know what? This needs to be taken care of. This needs to be healed. And it's a good thing. It can be a painful process sometimes, but go to God and ask Him to heal this area if you know it needs to be healed. Ask Him to reveal this area if it needs to potentially be revealed before you even talk to your spouse. Ask that would go well. It's a very hard conversation to have, and it often doesn't go well initially, and men in particular don't want to engage in that conversation whatsoever. And when men talk about it with each other, it might come up and they all just kind of accept it, and move on. They don't really want to get in each other's faces and say, hey, listen, this is like letting thieves and rapists into our home. We would never do that literally. Why are we doing that mentally and emotionally? Because it is hard. It is addictive. It is tempting. And you can often feel, especially as a man, you can often feel alone. Men isolate. They don't open up as much. They don't have community as well as females do, as women do. And so you need to pray about those things, that God would soften the heart, your heart, their heart. He would bless that part of your relationship because, again, He created it. He created it to be good. The enemy wants to take what God has created for good and he wants to distort it. He wants to make it look better, but in the end, it's nothing. It's nothing compared to what can be. You can't generate that. Your spouse can't generate that, but God can. And so, again, we really encourage you to start there if there's any place, because that won't be discouraging. That will be encouraging.
Start in prayer by yourself. Then if you can, as a couple, pray together. That really is the deepest and most pure form of intimacy that you can share together. And the Lord is faithful. He is good. He will answer your prayers. He will guide you and direct you. He will lead you. And there is hope that this part of your relationship can be restored, can be healed, and the pleasure and the connection between the two of you can be satisfying, that you can enjoy it together.
So we want you to be encouraged. We want you to be aware of this. Again, it's a topic that most don't like to talk about, that is easily dismissed or excused or rationalized. And we wanted to give you a picture today of what can be in marriage, and often isn't. You may already have this in your marriage, and if so, great. You've probably worked hard for that, and you want to work hard to maintain that. But most don't have this in their don't have this type of connection in their marriage, and so we want to encourage you if that's the case for you, because you're in good company. It is hard. Something like pornography easily comes in, and it is easily hidden, and it's not necessarily easily removed. But if you start with prayer and you start with a conversation, that's better than nothing. That's better than just trying to avoid it because it's awkward or can be painful. And then when you get to experience the benefits of removing distractions from your marriage, putting your marriage, your sexual relationship, but your marriage in the place that it needs to be, and the hard work that it takes, it pays out immensely. It is absolutely a wonderful thing to get to experience a healthy marriage. And so we want to encourage you that could be a couple weeks away, that could be months away, that could be years away, but it's worth the journey. It's worth the process. And we would want that for all of you.
Hard work pays off, and your marriage is well worth all of the hard work. Thanks for joining us today.